Right, we will now move on to the next and final topic in this stream, which is how farm vets cope. An exploration of how vets cope with the daily challenges of farm animal practice and how best these coping mechanisms might be developed into tools which can be easily accessed by the livestock veterinary community. And this is from Dr. Kate Stevens. Kate is an experienced qualitative social scientist and project manager. She's based in the epidemiology research units at Inverness in the Scottish Highlands. Kate's work involves a holistic view of human behaviour in the context of livestock disease, focusing on biosecurity practices and antimicrobial use. Informed by her research background in rural public health, she tries to adopt a farmer vet-centric approach and is involved in the development of preventative and self-management mental health intervention within the farming communities. Thank you for that, Kate. We will hand over to you now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for that. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And in this talk, I'm going to give an overview of the year one of the Sarah Brown Mental Health Research Grant. I'm going to tell you what we hope to do, what we actually did, what we found out along the way, and then what we produced. But the main section is going to be what we found out. So what we hope to do was we hope to gather the views and experiences of farm animal vets or vets in farm animal practice. And we wanted to find out how they managed to cope with the challenges that they felt and what they did to promote job satisfaction, or what were the good bits about their job. And one of the things that we did was we really wanted to have a co-production approach. So we wanted to incorporate the views of vets at every point in the whole process. So at this point, I just want to say thank you very much to all of the vets who did take part in different ways in different parts of the process. It was a real honour to speak to them. We conducted 31 interviews and it was a real privilege to hear about the experiences of people and their openness and honesty in describing the best bits about their job and also the struggles that they had. So there were 31 interviews and most people were male. And most people were still working in farm practice. Some had moved on and one was no longer in the UK, but had been previously in the UK. We recorded the interviews. They were all done by telephone. They were transcribed and analysed. So a lot of the interviews were between 30 minutes and 60 minutes. Some lasted a bit longer and some just a wee bit shorter. So I'm going to be kind to you because I think it's hard, especially when you've got the screen in front of you, that there's an awful lot of reading. So I'm going to try and give an overview and illustrate it by photos. And some of these photos are just kind of random ones I found on the internet, and I'll acknowledge them at the end. But while I'm going through it, I would really like you to have a think about what Rory said in his introduction in the main talk this morning, and that was about the triggers or the aspects of in his IMV model. He highlighted being defeated, being humiliated, and that sense of entrapment. So if you can have these things in your minds as I'm talking about going through the next few slides, I think that would be useful. So it won't be a surprise that a lot of people found the transition between graduating from vet school and practice a really difficult one. And they found themselves having come from quite a supportive background with peers and a lot of kind of clinical opportunities that were set up very well, to being alone in a field with a cow. And that was incredibly the word shell shock is used for that experience generally for vets once they've graduated, and that is very much the experience that was described. One of the other aspects of it was that when people finish and graduate, their heads are full of amazing information and knowledge. And then they arrive on farms and they meet farmers who have a whole pile of other experience and knowledge that's really quite different. And if in the slide behind me, you can see the two cars, one's tup and one's heifer. And these individuals are have a lifelong obsession with cows and sheep. and sometimes they feel that the new vet knows nothing about vet and sheep and knows nothing about farming. And so there's a real conflict between the knowledge that the vets have that's when they've just graduated, which is phenomenal, and then they arrive on the farm and that knowledge is not respected and it's not valued. And one practice manager did talk, or one director of a veterinary practice talked about managing the expectations of graduates, so that actually when they do speak to farmers, just act as if you know nothing, act as if you're just learning, and that will help to meet the gap between all the academic knowledge that they have and the translating that into information that's useful for farmers and meeting that gap. Other aspects of the job that people talked about were the kind of that there was a handful of treatments or procedures that they repeated a lot, and some of the work that they did was repetitive. It was muddy, bloody, and messy, and so some of the being realistic about expectations they felt was really important, but some people talked about, even when it is a repetitive task, actually it's the relationship side of things, whether it's the relationship with their peers, another vet that's helping them, or with the farmers, that is the thing that helps them to get through the times that they struggle. And some people really specifically talked about not being intellectually challenged, and they found that really difficult, having come from graduating with such an academic focus, and that actually didn't translate into their practice. Some of the best bits about the job, well, we asked them what the best bits were, and the most common themes were lambing and calving. People just talked about how amazing it was and the joy they got from it. And especially, you know, they were called out usually when things were going wrong, and when they were able to sort the problem and there was a live birth, that really sparked a lot of joy in them. And even vets who'd been doing it for many, many, many decades still got a buzz from a live calving. So one of the aspects that people talked about as being good and also not so good, there was the two sides of the coin, were support from peers and support from their management within the practice. And that, when that worked well, that was phenomenal. And it really, really helped people. Clearly, when it wasn't there, that made people feel much more vulnerable and isolated. One of the aspects that people talked about as being beneficial was CPD, or having a project like health planning, something to work on, so that was helped to alleviate the kind of intellectual boredom, that if they had something, a longer term project with a farmer or an academic project, that helped them to have something to focus on that was beneficial. So the other side of the coin was when things didn't go so well, and you know, death, disease, and disappointment. So sometimes people talked about arriving on scene on a farm, and you know, when the calving didn't go well, but actually they arrived and it was too late. And if the farmer had called them a few hours earlier, there would have been hope. And sometimes they would find that there was illness or disease, and actually that could have been prevented if the farmer had taken their advice previously. So that bred a lot of emotion and a lot of conflicting feelings. So sometimes at some point, they just felt that they had failed, and they questioned their own competency, in that they didn't manage to rescue this animal or save the situation or intervene, or and they question their own ability as a vet. And other times they're just frustrated with the farmer because they didn't pick up the phone earlier, or they didn't adhere to the advice that was previously given that would have alleviated this, prevented the problem happening. And other times they're dealing with the emotions of the farmer, who is really annoyed that having delayed calling out the vet because he didn't want to, or he or she didn't want to pay for the call. And now they have paid for the call, but it's not resulted in a positive outcome. And the farmers can be angry and frustrated and blame the vets in these situations. So there's a lot going on in terms of death, disease, and disappointment. So driving away from the farm, individuals can be in their cars for long periods of time. So there's two aspects of this that were problematic for some people. So initially what I'll say is that some people, it wasn't problematic. They would leave the farm, they would drive away and switch off and say, these things happen, I'm a good vet, I do good work. They reflect on previous successes, and some of them intellectually compartmentalize what they've done with that situation, and they move on and they say it'll be better tomorrow, or the next visit will be fine. And they manage their thoughts so that it isn't a problem. But for others, while they're driving, they can't drive in a way, they're rehearsing the whole situation again and again, saying, what could I have done differently? What did I do wrong? And just the dealing with the difficulty of it. And these times in the car were difficult for people. People talked about crying, people talking about feelings of dread, and it was so bad that some people, even when they did eventually get home, they couldn't get to sleep. They were still going over and over. Some people talked about it affecting them for days. There's another element of this, which is exhaustion. And for people are, having long hours and difficult, demanding jobs, but also long times driving in the car, and that there was a bit of a health and safety issue in terms of people working when they're so tired and driving when they're so tired. Another aspect that was discussed by some people was around health and safety, in that, that one vet with a cow in a field, sometimes if there was calves, there was very unpredictable behavior from the animals where they really did feel unsafe. For some farms, they've got great crushes and great facilities, there'll be other people around. Other times it's completely inadequate for what you would want to do in terms of a medical intervention. And the vets had difficulties in, some people said, I'm sorry, this is not appropriate, it's not safe for me, it's not safe for the animal, and they would refuse to do to deal with the situation. Others found it much more difficult because the farmer himself or herself was facing the same level of risk. And so it was difficult to say, well, I'm not prepared to do it. And a lot of this was about whether or not the practice supported them. And so if they, some people talked about the fact that they felt that they were valued less than the farmer client. And so they didn't feel empowered to look after themselves and keep themselves safe. It helped when people knew what their rotas were going to be and that they could plan time off, even if it was really, really busy through spring and they knew that it was going to be intense, if they could plan a holiday, and that would help people. But also just getting that, the work-life balance where they were able to interact with family and friends, dogs, and a lot of people used things like sport, being integrated into their local community, church, sporting, competitive sport like football or rugby. And some people just talked about basic things, about taking time to stop and eat, and instead of eating kind of rubbishy snacks, to kind of try to get proper food, but fairly basic stuff in terms of looking after themselves. And also, where people did cope better, they sometimes focused on having exercise, and that could be very difficult to manage in their day, but that was really important. So there were three main trigger points that emerged in what people said. The first one was, and it won't be a surprise to people, is when people graduate first, and that shell shock term that's used a lot. And especially in farm practice, where people tend, quite often have to move to a rural location that's quite far away from their previous support networks, and they might find it very difficult to be integrated into that community. So that was a trigger time that people could then find themselves deteriorating. Another one was about 5 years in, and this was when people were getting more confident, but actually started to, driving home at 2 o'clock in the morning, thinking about their peers that they were at school with, who had been to university, who are now earning more money, but for doing work that seems a lot easier than what they were doing. And again, that feeling of feeling trapped, and not because partly it was because they felt that they were, this was what they had worked so hard at for years, and what else were they going to do? But also they didn't want to disappoint their families, who had quite often supported them financially and certainly were very proud of them being vets. And, changing from this was really, they felt really difficult. And another trigger point was when people had more experience and they started in a kind of management role. So not only had they to deal with their own mental well-being, they also felt the burden of responsibility of the rest of their team, and that weighed very heavily on some people. They also felt that they didn't have any management training to make that transition, and it was more difficult to have that work-life balance because of the additional responsibilities they had. So in my conclusion, and it might seem a wee bit twee to use the Richard Branson quote, but in his business, he talks about clients do not come first, employees come first. And so I wondered what it would look like for these people if they were valued and they felt valued, and if the businesses, whether it's small practices or big corporates, really valued them and their work. And if that expectation of treatment were extended to farmers, to say, look, treat these people well, and actually the benefits that would emerge if the farm vets came first, then there could be benefits for livestock health and for the farmers as clients, because their relationships would be better, and they would take on more of the advice that was given, and that would be good for the vet practices as businesses. That's just my thoughts on it. So the last section is about what we did. And so I'm not going to go into detail about this because I don't have time, but it's all available at a click. So it's on How Farm Vets Cope. And the bulk of the resource here is quotes from the vets that we spoke to. Now, we haven't interfered very much. We've just, taken these quotes out and we've put them in themes or that hopefully you'll find useful. And they're also, there's three different lengths of quotes. Some are that you can just, a few seconds to read, and some are a medium and some are a bit longer. And there's also some audio quotes that are really lovely to listen to. And we've also included a mock-up of a map that would identify, that could be developed as an app where, if you were on call at 2 o'clock in the morning, you could actually click on the map and you could see vets elsewhere who were also on call. And there's also some other options that emerged from the suggestions. So again, thank you. This is just to acknowledge all the images that have been used from various sources. So thank you very much. It was really nice to be able to give you an overview of the study, and I hope you find it interesting and very interested in any questions. Thank you.